Hello, so in this video I'm going to show you how to model an orange. We recently are just making sort of a bunch of props. We recently made a banana, we did a strawberry for an animation. We recently just finished. Go check it out on YouTube and our various different social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram. But here we're just making a quick model of an orange, so the thing you're going to want to start out with is reference. Always start with reference. Whenever you're making anything, you think you might know what it looks like in your head. Chances are, you might be able to get pretty close, but probably not as accurate as you'd like. You'll go back and look at some reference after you make it, and you might realize that, hey, I missed all these things. So start with some reference. Good thing is, in Maya, we can create some image planes. So I've gone ahead and downloaded some reference here for our orange, created an image plane. This is the one we're going to model off of in the center. I'm just creating a second one here, just for some more reference so we can see the top and that little bit there where the branch would attach when an orange is actually on the tree, just the stem part, the base of the stem. So what we're going to do is just start with a sphere, nice and easy, because oranges are round. And then we're just going to go into our front view here, line this up and scale it to fit. Just making sure that looks right. Okay, and then because we don't want our orange to be perfectly round, nothing in reality is perfectly round. Whenever you're working in CG, it's always very important just to make sure that your objects aren't perfect, because that's probably one of the dead giveaways of 3D and CG work normally, is that if something looks too perfect, it just looks very fake. Nothing in nature is perfectly round, perfectly straight, perfectly symmetrical. Literally anything from nature is not perfect. So we're just adjusting the shape a little bit here. I'm adding a little bit of like flatness on the bottom, just imagining that the orange would be sitting on the floor for a while, on the floor, sorry, in a table, on a fruit bowl or something, so it's kind of compressed a little bit. And yeah, that's the shape of our orange. We'll just go ahead and smooth that, see what that looks like. And yeah, pretty happy with that. Okay, next thing we're going to do is just add the little divot, the indent where the remains of the stem is at the top. Then something else I also noticed is that around the part where the stem is, you have these little creases. So I'll probably go ahead and add those in too. Right now we're working really low poly. You always want to do that whenever you're starting out making something, regardless of what it is. Orange, human character, spaceship, robot, what have you. Always start out low poly, because if it gets too high poly too quickly, it's just going to bog down the scene. It's going to become difficult to make and work with. So starting out low poly here and just working with subdivision, just pressing free on the keyboard to subdiv preview this, just makes this so much easier, so much quicker. And then I'm literally just moving some of the vertices here to create these creases. And we're getting closer to something like the sort of creases you see in the top of an orange. You just have to play around with these things, just make sure kind of that it looks right, until you get something that you like. What I'm going to do here is a technique I used to like to use sometimes, is just use the crease tool to hold these edges. Instead of adding actual geometry, you can just use the crease tool, drag that out, and then you go ahead and smooth, and you see how it's like sort of harden those edges as if you have added bevels or holding edges, but actually you haven't. It's just telling Maya to sort of hold those for you. And then what I'll go ahead and do later is we'll subdivide this a couple of times, and then Maya will take into account those creased edges. The poly count around that area doesn't get exponentially increased. You don't have to mess around with the topology to get those edge loops working correctly on a sphere like this. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just flatten this area out before we put the stem in, just so it has sort of an area to sit in and we don't have any sort of gross looking spiky geometry in the center. Just sort of adjust things here a little bit. Oh yeah, sometimes when you extrude in like that, it will remove your creasing, because it's basically creating new edges, doesn't it? So you have to just go ahead and add those back in, like I'm doing here. Yep, and then we have our creases back, and we also have a flat area for the stem to go in. Okay, all I'm doing here is just kind of adjusting the creases, extending this one out a little bit, adding some more edge creasing just to hold that edge a bit more. just to make it so it's not so uniform. You know, whenever you're modeling something, you just want to remove all sort of uniformity, unless you're making something that's like specifically machined. Like if you're making a modern car, then it's probably going to be pretty symmetrical. You know, in reality, not 100% perfectly, but you know, as far as the human eye is concerned, it will be. But if you're making something like an orange, a face, anything organic that's just naturally occurring, then you're always going to want to add just like as much variation as possible. You know, you'll see this like if you go to the supermarket and you want to buy like vegetables, like a carrot for example, they come in all different shapes and sizes. So you just want to make sure that your model reflects that too. You know, if we just left this as a sphere, then it wouldn't look, you know, very realistic at all. It'd be all right for maybe something a bit more stylized, but then even stylized, you know, there are certain rules that you have to follow. Okay, now what we're going to do is go ahead and add in the stem part of the model. So for this, we're just going to start with a cylinder. I'm just going to place that there in the divot that we made earlier. Just have a look at our reference. I'm just, you know, always make sure you go back and check your reference whenever you're making something. Keep checking it over and over again. Better yet, have it next to you. You know, if it's something like an orange, I would encourage you to just go and get an orange if you can and have that literally next to you, because then you can kind of like feel it, see it right next to you, keep referring back to it, you know, and then also you can just eat it afterwards. So, you know, win-win really, rather than just having a picture. So I'm just gonna scale that down to the sort of size that I want it to be, and the height, adjust it a little bit more. Then what I'm going to do now is start taking the faces here and extrude them out to create the I don't know what you'd call these really, like arms. They're not really petals. I'm not sure what word you would use, but the sort of the bits that extend out from here at the base of the stem. And this looks very rough right now, you know, and you can see it's intersecting, but it's all about just getting like the base shape in, and then we can go ahead and tweak it afterwards. And even here, you know, I'm making sure not to have every single one exactly the same size. You know, we've got some there which are a decent bit wider, some a bit smaller, some not as long, some a bit longer. And there you go. Then we'll just go ahead and level off those vertices. Yeah. Just to make sure that's flat and we have a nice base to work from. And then I'm going to go ahead and just flatten these out so that they're not curved, because we're going to want to bring these in and make them a bit pointed. Okay, now we're going to start scaling these in to give the points to these sort of, I keep wanting to say leaves, but they're not really leaves, the arms of the base of the stem, the jaggedy bits that stick out. Okay, so we're just going to scale in the faces here so that we have a bit of a holding edge, because what I'm going to do now is start adjusting these so that they're not perfectly flat. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just add some edges going across these bits that stick out here, the jaggedy bits, so that I can sort of bend this whole thing and have the edges not perfectly straight. I'm just going to add 2 here, because again we want to keep this low poly for the time being, just because it's easier to work with, and I recognize the geometry is not the cleanest, and some people might say, you know, oh no, you should keep everything as quads, and generally yes, but once you've been doing this for a while, you realize that sometimes you can break the rules. You know, if something's not deforming, it really doesn't matter, you know, like if you go ahead and smooth this, if you have to smooth it, and it smooths fine, or it looks correct, or, you know, if it's a small thing like this, it really doesn't matter. You know, I would say if you're trying to get into the industry to be a 3D modeler or something like that, especially if you're trying to get into games or film and TV, for your portfolios, definitely make it as clean and as, you know, keep quads on everything, just because they'll want to see that you can do that. But, you know, eventually you learn that you can break the rules a little bit. So, you know, don't come at me if you see some disgusting geometry, because the end result is fine. And whether or not it had quads, you know, it wouldn't really make a difference here, and it would look the same. And, you know, the only person that really minds is me, and I don't. So you can see a little bit of distortion there, because there's no edges. We've got some big n-gons. N-gons are just faces with 5 or more vertices. So just going to make sure these aren't intersecting. Okay, yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. What I'm going to do now is then create the rest of the stem. So we're just going to extrude that up a bit, just to create that bit where the actual stem sort of connected to, but then was broken off after the orange got picked off the tree. Just bring that up a bit, scale that back in, just try and create that shape. This is such a tiny part of the model. You know, if we were doing something, if this was supposed to be hyper-realistic and look sort of really up close, then we would pay a lot more attention to this. And we probably wouldn't just be modeling it like this anyway. We would make a base mesh and then go ahead and sculpt up some details in just like ZBrush or something. Just to really make it look as realistic as possible. But for these purposes, you know, for an orange, that we're mainly probably just going to see this in like the mid to background, sorry, with depth of field and things like that. This sort of thing will be fine. It just has to look the part, really. And I'm just doing a basic cleanup there, auto Maya cleanup, just to sort of remove the n-gons and make it look a bit better. And there's some slight deformation, but really, you know, it just adds to it at this point. And once the textures are on there and we see it in the viewport when it's rendered, you're not really going to notice. And then we're adding just a little bit more deformation there, so nothing, the jaggedy bits aren't all perfect and the same and coming up at the same angle. Bringing that one into the side a bit. And then we're just going to go ahead and smooth that. And then it all becomes quads anyway. That's just sort of how Maya interprets it. And then soften the edges. And then we're going to go ahead and smooth that, and then remove the creases. And there you go. So we have that those creases in the orange now. We're actually having to sculpt them in. Just increase the scale of this a little bit, mainly just because I'm going backwards and forwards, looking at the reference, and thinking, you know, maybe this doesn't look quite big enough. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and smooth that again, just to really give us a nice amount of detail. And in that way, if we decide to go ahead and add some displacement to this, we then have the geometry to do it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is start looking at the UVs. So that may not be 100% important, because we might end up procedurally texturing this, in which case the UVs aren't too important unless you want to start using ramps and using UV coordinates and things like that. But we're going to create the UVs anyway. Just do a simple unwrap. Just going to take the top two faces, or sort of sections from here. It's quite tricky to UV unwrap a sphere sometimes. The reason I'm doing it this way is so that I don't have these sort of harsh poles at the top where the UVs are just being stretched inwards. I'm just going to adjust these, sort of scale it down to fit on one UDIM. And what I'm doing here is just getting the scale of each UV tile and then just making sure they're all accurate, or all the same, just so it's uniform. And then for this little guy on the top here, kind of looks like a starfish. We're just going to do an automatic unwrap. And go ahead and unfold those. You know, terrible UVs. I really wouldn't recommend this if you're seriously going to texture something that's quite big in Hero. But for these purposes, you know, you can get away with it. Again, like with the topology, sometimes you can break the rules a little bit. But yeah, that is our orange model, and thank you very much for watching. In the next part, we'll be getting into the texturing.